ABC General Hospital spoilers for the week of April 6 to 10 reveal that the fragile balance of Port Charles begins to tilt in a way that feels both inevitable and deeply unsettling, as truths that were once buried beneath layers of deception begin to surface with a force no one can fully control. At the center of this unraveling stands a revelation that does not simply shock, it redefines everything. Nathan is no longer who anyone believed him to be. The confirmation that he is, in fact, Faison does not just expose a lie, it exposes an entire structure of manipulation that has been quietly shaping events from the shadows. This is not a twist that can be contained. It is a fracture that spreads outward, touching every alliance, every secret, every fragile thread of trust that still exists within General Hospital. Nathan does not react like a man who has been exposed. He reacts like someone who has been waiting for this moment, someone who understands that truth, when revealed at the right time, can be just as powerful as deception. Rather than retreat, he steps forward, tightening his grip on the chaos he has helped create. Control becomes his objective, not in a desperate attempt to survive, but as a calculated move to reshape the narrative in his favor. He begins to apply pressure in ways that are subtle yet unmistakable, directing that pressure toward Cullum and Jen Sidwell, two men who are no strangers to power but now find themselves caught in a game that is shifting beyond their expectations. For Cullum, the threat is immediate and deeply personal. His position, once secure through intimidation and carefully constructed influence, begins to feel unstable under Nathan's scrutiny. Every move he makes carries the weight of being watched, analyzed, and potentially exposed. Sidwell, on the other hand, faces a different kind of pressure, one that challenges not his strength but his control. He is accustomed to being the one who orchestrates outcomes, who dictates the flow of events from behind the scenes. But Nathan's presence disrupts that dynamic, introducing an unpredictability that Sidwell cannot easily contain. The tension between them does not erupt into open conflict. It simmers, building in intensity as each man tests the limits of the other's power. While this dangerous game unfolds in the shadows, a different kind of battle takes shape within the walls of the hospital. Molly stands on the threshold of a procedure that is as emotionally charged as it is physically demanding. The upcoming surgery is not just a medical necessity. It is a moment that forces her to confront vulnerability in a way she has long tried to avoid. The uncertainty surrounding the outcome lingers in every quiet moment, in every breath taken before the inevitable arrives. It is not fear alone that defines her state of mind, but a complex mix of hope, doubt, and the unspoken question of what comes after. At her side, Cody begins to reveal a side of himself that few have truly seen. His readiness to act, to step forward not out of obligation but out of genuine care, marks a shift that is impossible to ignore. This is not the impulsive Cody who reacts without thinking. This is someone who chooses to stay, to support, to become a steady presence in a moment defined by uncertainty. The emotional connection that forms between him and Molly does not arrive dramatically. It builds quietly, through small gestures, through the kind of attention that speaks louder than words. In a world where so much is driven by conflict and betrayal, this emerging bond feels almost fragile, as if it exists in defiance of the chaos surrounding it. Yet even in this moment of closeness, there is an undercurrent of tension that cannot be dismissed. Rick Lansing watches from a distance that is both protective and conflicted. His concern for Molly is genuine, rooted in a sense of responsibility that he cannot easily separate from his past. He understands the stakes of the surgery not just in terms of physical risk, but in what it represents for her future. And in that understanding, he begins to act not impulsively, but with a quiet determination to ensure that nothing is left to chance. Rick's actions are careful, deliberate, shaped by a need to do what is right, even as he struggles with the knowledge of who he has been. This duality defines him in this moment. He is both a man seeking redemption and one who knows that redemption is never guaranteed. His concern for Molly becomes a way to anchor himself, to prove perhaps more to himself than to anyone else that he is capable of choosing differently. And yet, beneath that effort lies the fear that his past may still cast a shadow over everything he touches. As these storylines begin to converge, the emotional landscape of Port Charles grows increasingly complex. Nathan's pursuit of control, Cullum and Sidwell's struggle to maintain their influence, Molly's confrontation with vulnerability, Cody's emerging sense of purpose, and Rick's attempt to reconcile who he was with who he wants to be, all of these threads intertwine, creating a tension that feels both immediate and inevitable. What makes this moment so compelling is not just the events themselves, but the motivations driving them. Nathan is not simply seeking power, he is redefining it. Cullum and Sidwell are not merely resisting, they are adapting, recalibrating their strategies in response to a threat they cannot fully predict. Molly is not just facing surgery, she is confronting the limits of her own strength. Cody is not simply offering support, he is stepping into a role that demands more than he has ever given before. Rick is not just caring for Molly, he is attempting to rewrite the narrative of his own life. The hospital becomes more than a setting, it becomes a crossroads where personal battles intersect with larger conflicts. Every decision carries weight, every interaction holds the potential to shift the balance. There is no clear line between victory and defeat, no simple resolution waiting at the end of the tension. Instead, there is only movement, constant and relentless, driven by choices that cannot be undone once made. And through it all, the question that lingers is not whether things will change, but how far those changes will reach. Because in Port Charles, transformation never happens in isolation. It spreads, reshaping lives, redefining relationships, and leaving behind consequences that no one can fully anticipate. The truth about Nathan is only the beginning. The surgery is only one moment in a much larger journey. The connections forming between Cody, Molly, and Rick are only the first signs of shifts that will continue to unfold. Nothing remains untouched. And as the tension builds, one realization becomes impossible to ignore. The closer each of them moves toward what they want, the more they risk losing control of everything they thought they understood. The tension in Port Charles does not arrive like a storm that can be seen from afar. It builds in silence, in the spaces between words, in the way people begin to look at each other just a little longer than necessary, as if searching for something hidden beneath the surface. At the center of that slow-burning unease stands Willow Tate, a woman who has already crossed a line she cannot uncross, now forced to confront the terrifying possibility that someone else may be close to discovering the truth she has fought so desperately to contain. The shift begins the moment she realizes that Kai Taylor might know more than he should. It is not a confirmation, not yet, but it does not need to be. In a world where secrets are currency and survival depends on anticipation, suspicion alone is enough to trigger a chain reaction. Willow's mind does not move toward confession or redemption. It moves toward calculation. Every memory, every interaction, every word Kai has spoken begins to rearrange itself in her thoughts, forming a pattern that feels impossible to ignore. And once that pattern takes shape, it leaves her with a single horrifying question. How much does he really know? Fear does not paralyze her, it sharpens her. What once might have been hesitation is now replaced by a cold, deliberate focus. Willow understands that the truth about what she has done about Drew, about the violence she has already unleashed, cannot survive exposure. Not in Port Charles, not in a place where secrets do not stay buried for long. The life she has constructed, fragile as it already is, would collapse under the weight of that revelation, and so she begins to consider options she never thought she would entertain again. This is where the madness begins to take form, not as chaos, but as control taken too far. Willow does not see herself as someone spiraling out of control. She sees herself as someone correcting a threat, someone protecting what still remains of her life. The idea of adjusting the truth becomes more than manipulation, it becomes justification. If the truth is dangerous, then perhaps it can be reshaped. If a witness is a risk, then perhaps that risk can be eliminated. These thoughts do not arrive all at once. They build, layer by layer, until the line between defense and destruction begins to blur. The most terrifying part is how rational it all feels to her. She does not wake up one day and decide to become something darker. She arrives there step by step, each decision grounded in a logic that feels, in the moment, impossible to argue against. If Kai exposes her, everything is lost. If everything is lost, then nothing she has done will matter. And if that is the case, then stopping him by any means necessary becomes not just an option, but a necessity. Meanwhile, beyond Willow's internal descent, another force begins to rise, one that threatens to consume Port Charles in an entirely different way. The tension between Jen Sidwell and Sonny Corinthos has reached a point where restraint is no longer sustainable. What once existed as calculated hostility is now evolving into something far more dangerous, a confrontation that neither man is willing to avoid and neither man is likely to survive unchanged. Sidwell is not driven by impulse. His actions are deliberate, strategic, rooted in a need for control that borders on obsession. The death of Marco is not something he has accepted. It is something he has internalized, transformed into a purpose that defines his next move. For him, this is not just about revenge. It is about restoring balance in a world where he believes that balance has been violently disrupted, and to do that he must identify the truth, no matter how deeply it has been buried. Sonny, on the other hand, operates from a place of instinct sharpened by experience. He understands men like Sidwell, understands the way they think, the way they move, the way they wait, but understanding does not equate to control. The closer Sidwell moves toward uncovering the truth about Marco's killer, the more volatile the situation becomes. Sonny knows that whatever happens next will not remain contained. It will spread, affecting not just him, but everyone connected to him, his family, his allies, his enemies. The revelation of the killer's identity looms over everything like an approaching storm. It is no longer a question of if the truth will come out, but when and what will be left standing when it does. Each piece of the puzzle is moving into place, drawn together by forces that none of the characters can fully control. Willow's secret, Kai's suspicion, Sidwell's determination, Sunny's resistance, all of it begins to converge in a way that feels both inevitable and catastrophic. What makes this convergence so explosive is not just the stakes, but the emotional weight behind each decision. Willow is not acting out of cruelty, she is acting out of fear. Sidwell is not driven by chaos, he is driven by purpose. Sunny is not simply defending himself, he is protecting everything he has built. And yet, despite the clarity of their motivations, the outcome remains uncertain, because each of them is operating within a reality that is shifting faster than they can adapt to it. Port Charles, once a place defined by its ability to absorb and survive conflict, now feels like it is on the edge of something far more destructive. The usual patterns no longer apply. The lines between ally and enemy are beginning to blur. Trust becomes a liability. Silence becomes a weapon, and truth, once something that could be delayed, manipulated, or hidden, becomes the most dangerous force of all. As the tension reaches its breaking point, the sense of inevitability becomes impossible to ignore. Willow's calculations are no longer theoretical. They are leading her toward a choice that will define everything that comes next. Sidwell and Sunny are no longer circling each other. They are moving toward direct confrontation, toward a moment where strategy gives way to action. And the truth about Marco's killer, once hidden in the shadows, is now being pulled into the light, whether anyone is ready for it or not. There is no clean resolution waiting at the end of this path, no version of events where everyone walks away unchanged. What lies ahead is not just conflict, but transformation of relationships, of identities, of the very structure that holds Port Charles together. And in that transformation, one truth becomes painfully clear. Once the secrets are exposed, there will be no returning to what existed before. The city is no longer holding its breath, it is bracing for impact.